Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something that, well, it impacts all of us, whether we realize it or not, how we make choices.
That's right.
We've got a really interesting stack of sources to unpack, and right at the top is Richard Shotton's book, The Illusion of Choice. Very insightful stuff.
Yeah, it is. And our goal today really is to get past the sort of marketing fluff and pull out the real, evidence-backed reasons behind our decisions.
Exactly.
And maybe more importantly, how those decisions can be subtly guided. Think of this as like your shortcut to understanding the science of persuasion.
With takeaways you can actually use.
Right. Immediately applicable takeaways.
Yeah. And this isn't just about, dusty old theories gathering dust on a shelf. We're diving into the practical side of behavioral science.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from building new habits to the hidden power of how things are priced, even the specific words used.
And what's so powerful about this, as the sources really highlight, is that it's built on solid ground. We're talking peer-reviewed studies, experiments.
Right, not just someone's opinion or anecdote. Real proof.
Exactly. The book really emphasizes that. It's about understanding the actual drivers of behavior, often things we're not even consciously aware of.
So, you should probably prepare for some surprising insights. Stuff you can start applying, pretty much right away.
Okay, let's get into it. Where should we start? Habits seem like a big one.
Yeah, let's unpack habits, something we all grapple with, right? Forming new ones, breaking old ones. Our sources point to 6 key principles, drawing on work from psychologists like B.J. Fogg, Nir Eyal, Wendy Wood, some heavy hitters.
Definitely. And the first critical piece, according to the research, is timing. Picking the right moment.
The fresh start effect.
Exactly. Catherine Milkman's work on this is fascinating. She found these natural new beginnings, start of a week, a month, birthdays, new year. They create a kind of mental break from our past selves. Makes us more receptive to change, that New Year's resolution feeling. It's actually a real psychological phenomenon.
It's like hitting a reset button. Gives you that clean slate feeling. And the data backs this up, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Milkman's studies showed increased gym attendance around these days.
Right.
And even, get this, a temporary dip in crime rates.
Really?
Yeah. It's like our collective brain takes a pause.
So the practical takeaway for you listening is, if you want to start a new habit, maybe try aligning it with one of these fresh starts.
Precisely. And there was this 2015 study that took it further. They found that simply labeling a date as, say, the first day of spring, compared to just calling it the third Thursday in March, significantly increased student signups for goal reminders. Just the label shows the subtle power of framing time.
Okay, so timing is crucial. Got it. But the sources also say pretty clearly that willpower alone, it's not enough.
Not even close.
Principle number 2, don't just rely on motivation. Create a cue instead. What kind of cues are we talking about?
Think of cues as triggers. Could be a specific time, a place, even a mood or feeling that prompts the behavior you want. There's a really clear study by Sarah Milne from 2002, just telling people to exercise or giving them leaflets didn't do much, predictably.
Right.
But when they asked people to decide when, where, and with whom they'd exercise, basically making a concrete plan and implementation intention, their exercise rates shot way up. It moves it from a vague, I should exercise more, to, okay, Tuesday after work at the park with Sarah.
That's a huge difference. Makes it almost automatic by linking it to a specific context. Like Nationwide's Payday Save Day campaign.
Perfect modern example. Connects saving directly to an existing predictable cue getting paid.
Which leads nicely into the third principle, right? Using an existing behavior to create a cue. Habit stacking.
Exactly. Piggybacking on something you already do, Gabby Judah's 2013 study on flossing is great here.
Flossing, okay. Always a tricky habit.
Right. The key insight was that doing the new habit before the existing one worked better. So flossing before brushing led to more consistent flossing than trying to do it after.
Oh, interesting. I would have thought after.
Me too, initially. But maybe it anchors it better. The lesson is, look at your routines, find something solid, and attach the new habit right before it.
Like a little behavioral chain reaction. Okay, principle 4.
Yeah?
Make the cue distinctive. Make it stand out.
Yep. Make it noticeable. Milkman and Rogers did another study in 2016, this time with a cafe coupon.
Okay.
They found that just mentioning a slightly weird visual cue on the flyer, I think it was a stuffed alien, significantly increased coupon redemption compared to a plain flyer.
A stuffed alien. Seriously?
So seriously. It just makes the cue more memorable, harder to ignore, stands out from the clutter.
All right, so, right time. Clear, distinctive cue linked to an existing habit. What's principle 5?
Make the behavior easy. Really easy, especially the first step. This is where chunking comes in.
Breaking it down.
Yeah, breaking down the big goal into the smallest, most manageable steps possible. Lower the barrier to entry right down. Think baby steps.
Makes total sense. Don't aim to write a novel day one. Aim for 5 minutes, or one sentence even.
Exactly. And the final habit principle, which I also found really counterintuitive at first, is consider uncertain rewards.
Right. Why does unpredictability work? Seems less reliable.
It taps into this powerful psychological pull of, well, chance and surprise. Even if the average payout is lower than a guaranteed reward, that element of maybe can be incredibly motivating. Think of like Pret a Manger's old loyalty scheme where you might randomly get a free coffee.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Or like Dishoom's Matka dice roll for a free meal sometime.
Exactly. That little hit of delightful uncertainty keeps us engaged. Sometimes unpredictability beats reliability for motivation.
It's like a little dopamine lottery.
Yeah.
And finally, just a quick reminder on timing for habit formation. Wendy Wood's research.
Right. It takes an average of 66 days for a behavior to become truly automatic. But, and this is key, there's huge individual variation. Could be much shorter, could be much longer.
So be patient with yourself. Okay, massive topic, habits. Let's switch gears. How about reducing friction, making things easier?
Yes, this is often just as powerful, if not more so, than trying to boost motivation. Kurt Lewin's force field analysis is useful here.
Explain that.
Basically, any behavior has driving forces pushing you towards it, and restraining forces holding you back. Instead of always pushing harder on the accelerator, sometimes it's much more effective to just release the handbrake, remove the obstacles, reduce the friction.
And the evidence for this is pretty stark, isn't it? That 2017 study by Bergman and Rogers on signing up for educational services.
Oh, staggering results. They went from a standard, probably slightly clunky process to a simple reply start text message to full automatic enrollment.
And the sign-up rates.
Went from like 1% to 97% with automatic enrollment. The simplified text option was somewhere in between, but still a massive leap.
Wow. Just shows how even tiny hurdles can completely derail action.
It really does. And what's fascinating is that in the same study, teachers consistently underestimated the impact of that friction. They predicted much higher signups even for the difficult process.
It's easy to forget how hard things are for the user when you're the one designing it, I guess.
Absolutely. We develop expert blindness.
It's like being in a nice restaurant, you want another glass of wine, but catching the waiter's eye feels like a hassle.
Yeah.
Interrupts the flow.
Exactly. Which is why Bob Ricard's press for champagne button is just genius.
Right. Removes that tiny barrier, makes indulgence frictionless.
Precisely. And when you're trying to reduce friction, focusing on making that very first step incredibly easy is often the key.
Which brings us to the foot in the door technique.
Yeah. Classic persuasion tactic. Start with a small, easy to say yes to request. Get that initial agreement. Then you follow up with a larger request you actually wanted. People are much more likely to agree to the big thing after they've already said yes to the small thing.
That 1966 study's amazing, asking people to put a tiny sticker in their window first.
Right, a little Be a Safe Driver sticker. Most people agreed.
And then they asked about putting up this huge, ugly Drive Safely sign on their lawn.
And the agreement rate for the big, ugly sign shot up dramatically compared to the group who were only asked about the big sign. That first small yes made a huge difference.
Incredible.
Yeah.
But too much ease can be bad too, right? Choice paralysis.
Oh, definitely. Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper's jam study is the famous example.
Right, the supermarket display. Lots of jams versus just a few.
Exactly. The big display with 24 jams attracted more people to stop and look, but the smaller display with only 6 jams resulted in far more actual purchases.
So why is that? Just too overwhelming?
Pretty much. Our sources outlined 4 conditions where choice paralysis is more likely to kick in. 1, if you don't have strong preferences already.
Yeah.
2, if the options are unfamiliar. 3, if the options are all pretty similar. And 4, if they're just really difficult to evaluate or compare.
Makes sense. Like staring at a massive menu you've never seen before, you just freeze up.
Exactly. And one last point on reducing friction. You've got to be careful not to clash with your audience's existing worldview or values.
Yeah. Like the Texas Don't Mess with Texas campaign.
Perfect example. They needed to reduce littering, specifically among, well, Bubba's in pickup trucks was the target audience description.
Right.
A standard environmental message wasn't going to cut it, so instead they tapped into fierce Texas pride. Don't mess with Texas. It resonated. It worked with their existing identity, didn't try to fight it.
It's about finding the right angle, meeting people where they are. Smart. Okay, so we've talked about reducing friction, but sometimes you actually want to add friction strategically.
Yes, counterintuitive, but true. While usually we want smooth paths for good behaviors, adding friction can be very effective at reducing undesirable ones.
Like the paracetamol example in the UK.
Exactly. Reducing the maximum pack size you could buy at once made it physically harder to quickly accumulate enough pills for a dangerous overdose. And overdose rates subsequently fell. A simple bit of friction with a big impact.
A speed bump for a harmful action. And just like foot in the door encourages action, there's a reverse technique for discouraging things, or maybe getting compliance on something else. The door in the face.
Right. It's quite clever. You start with a huge request, something you're pretty sure they'll reject.
Okay, slam a door in your face.
Metaphorically, yes. Then, after they've refused the big request, you immediately follow up with a smaller, more reasonable request, which was your actual goal all along.
How does that work?
Cialdini's research showed this really well with asking for volunteer time. First, ask for a massive commitment, like 2 years of weekly volunteering. They say no. Then ask for just one afternoon.
And they're more likely to agree to the afternoon.
Significantly more likely. It works partly because of reciprocity. You appear to make a concession by reducing your request, so they feel a social obligation to reciprocate and meet you halfway.
Fascinating contrast to foot in the door. One makes the first step feel easy, the other makes the target step feel easy by comparison.
Precisely. Now, another way to add friction, but in a way that actually increases value. The IKEA effect.
Yes. Building your own flat pack furniture makes you love it more.
Pretty much. The effort we invest in creating something increases its perceived value to us. The classic story is Betty Crocker adding an egg to their instant cake mix back in the day.
Right. Sales weren't great initially because it felt too easy.
Exactly. Just adding water felt like cheating. Making the baker add an egg made them feel more involved, like it was their cake. And sales took off.
And there's actual research on this, beyond anecdotes.
Oh, yes. That 2012 study where people built IKEA boxes or did origami, they consistently valued the things they built themselves much more highly than identical pre-assembled items.
Even the effort of opening a wine bottle.
Yeah, there's research suggesting the slight effort of using a corkscrew, compared to a screw cap, can subtly enhance the perceived quality and enjoyment of the wine. The ritual matters.
But there's a catch, isn't there? The labor illusion.
Right. It's not just about the effort itself. Customers often need to see that effort is being made, either by them or for them.
Like that travel website study.
Exactly. They simulated a flight search. One version just showed the results quickly. The other version showed a little animation of the system working, searching different airlines. People preferred the one that showed the work, even if it took slightly longer. It felt like the site was doing more for them. Transparency about effort boosts perceived value.
So, show you're working.
Yeah.
Okay, one more friction-related idea. The generation effect. Making people generate information themselves.
Yes, this is about memory. Information that you actively generate yourself is much more memorable than information you passively receive.
Like filling in the blanks.
Exactly. Studies found people remembered brand names better if they had to complete a word fragment, like B-A-D, compared to just reading the full name.
So asking questions in your marketing copy could work like this too.
Absolutely. It engages the reader, makes them actively process the information, which boosts recall and persuasiveness. And interestingly, even making text slightly harder to read.
Harder to read. Why would that help?
Using a slightly disfluent font, one that's not perfectly smooth and easy. Oppenheimer's research showed this can actually improve recall because it forces your brain to engage more deeply to process it. A little bit of cognitive friction can be good for memory.
Wow, okay. Lots of ways friction can be used strategically. Let's move on to something maybe simpler linguistically.
Yeah.
The Keats heuristic. Rhyme.
Yeah, the power of rhyme. It seems almost too simple, but research shows it's surprisingly effective.
How so?
Well, think about old sayings like coughs and sneezes spread diseases. It just sounds right. Studies show that rhyming statements are often perceived as more truthful or believable than the exact same statement without the rhyme.
Really? Just because it rhymes?
Seems so. McGlone and Tokibox's study compared rhyming aphorisms with non-rhyming versions expressing the same idea. people rated the rhyming ones as more accurate.
And who could forget Johnny Cochran in the O.J. trial? If the gloves don't fit, you must acquit.
Exactly. The rhyme makes it punchy, memorable, and feels somehow more definitive.
And memorability is the other key benefit, right?
Yeah. Huge benefit. A pilot study mentioned in the sources found that rhyming statements were recalled literally twice as often as non-rhyming equivalents.
Double the recall. That's massive. Why isn't it used more often?
Good question. Shotton speculates maybe marketers sometimes focus more on impressing their peers with complex strategies than on simple effectiveness. Or maybe it feels a bit unsophisticated.
Maybe. But the data suggests it works. It's also worth noting, though, that presentation matters visually, too, not just auditorily.
Right.
That font study again.
Right. Song and Schwartz found a difficult-to-read font made a task seem harder and take longer, even if the actual task instructions were identical. So fluency matters in different ways.
Okay, next up. Concreteness. This seems really fundamental.
It is, and often underestimated. Our sources really hammer home how much more memorable concrete language is compared to abstract stuff.
How much more memorable?
One study by Begg showed a 10-fold difference in recall between concrete and abstract nouns. 10 times.
Wow, okay, that's a huge advantage. It's about using vivid, tangible language people can picture.
Exactly. Think Apple's launch of the iPod. 1,000 songs in your pocket.
Right. Instantly, understandable, relatable, concrete. You can picture it.
Compare that to vague corporate speak like, inspire the next, or find your happy. What does that even mean?
It's just abstract fluff. And concreteness helps people visualize using the product, too.
Yes, Elder and Krishna's study about cake ads showed this. Simply changing the orientation of the fork in the picture, making it easier for right-handed people to imagine picking it up, actually increased purchase intentions. Helping people mentally simulate the experience is powerful.
Though there's a nuance there, right, if the experience is unpleasant.
Right. Making unpleasant things easier to imagine can actually decrease desire. You probably don't want people vividly imagining the side effects of a medication, for instance.
Makes sense. Paint a positive, concrete picture. And this links to the power of individual stories over statistics.
Absolutely. That quote, often attributed to Stalin, "One death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic," captures it perfectly. Our brains connect with individual, concrete narratives far more easily than large, abstract numbers.
And experts might struggle with this.
Yeah, Heath and Heath talked about this in Made to Stick. Experts get so used to thinking abstractly in their field, they forget how to communicate concretely to non-experts. The curse of knowledge.
A good reminder to always translate jargon and abstraction into tangible specifics. Okay, related to concreteness, but slightly different. Precision.
Yes, using specific numbers rather than rounded ones.
Why does that work? Seems trivial.
Because specific numbers feel more believable, more credible. That 2006 study on body spray claims something like 82% effective versus 80% effective. The slightly more precise number was perceived as more accurate and trustworthy.
It implies you've actually measured it carefully, right?
Yeah.
Not just plucked a round number out of the air.
Exactly. There's a strong mental link between specificity and accuracy. So rounding off your stats in marketing might actually be undermining your message.
And this applies to pricing, too. Precise pricing.
Yes. Research by Januszewski and Uthi found that precise prices, like $395,425 for a house instead of $400,000, or $497 for cheese instead of $5, can signal better value. Consumers subconsciously assume the seller has calculated the price carefully down to the penny, implying a lower markup compared to a round number, which feels more arbitrary.
And this isn't just lab studies.
No, it's been corroborated in real-world house sales in Florida. Precisely priced homes tended to sell for amounts closer to their asking price.
Fascinating. Those last few cents really matter psychologically.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about extremeness aversion, our dislike of extremes.
Yeah, it's a very common bias. We tend to avoid the options at either end of a range and gravitate towards the middle, the Goldilocks effect.
Like in that pricing scenario example.
Exactly. Offer just two options, say a standard cleaner and a premium one. Then add a third, super expensive option.
And people don't buy the super expensive one.
Really not many. But suddenly, the original premium option looks like the reasonable middle ground, and its sales increase. The extreme option makes the middle one seem more appealing.
So launching a super premium version can be a strategy just to make your existing premium ones sell better. Clever. And this gets stronger with age.
Apparently so, according to Drolet and Hasty's research. Older adults show more extremeness aversion.
And then there's the decoy effect, which is related but slightly different.
Right. The decoy effect involves introducing an option that is asymmetrically dominated, meaning it's clearly worse than one of your options, the target, on all relevant attributes, but not necessarily worse than all other options. It's specifically designed to make the target look better by comparison.
Like the beer example.
Yep. You have beer A for $1.80 and beer B for $2.50. Beer B is better quality. People might be split. Then you introduce beer C for $2.40, but it's clearly lower quality than beer B, maybe even similar quality to beer A.
So beer C is the decoy. No one really wants it.
Exactly. But its presence makes beer B look like a much better deal, only slightly more expensive than the decoy, but much better quality. So more people choose beer B.
Sneaky.
Yeah.
And this works better on younger people.
Yes, research suggests the decoy effect is stronger with younger adults. Older adults might be better at ignoring the irrelevant option.
It's all about manipulating the comparison set. Okay, next bias. Denominator neglect. Sounds mathematical.
It kind of is. It's our tendency to focus too much on the numerator, the number of times something happened, and not enough on the denominator, the total number of opportunities, or the base rate.
The jelly bean study illustrates this well, right?
Classic example, Dinez, Raj, and Epstein. People were offered a chance to draw a red jelly bean to win a prize. One bowl had 7 red beans out of 100, 7% chance. Another bowl had 1 red bean out of 10, 10% chance.
Logically, you choose the bowl with the 10% chance.
Logically, yes. But a significant number of people chose the bowl with more red beans, 7, even though the probability of success was lower. They focused on the absolute number of red beans, the numerator, and neglected the denominator, the total beans.
Wow. Our intuition isn't always great with probability, and this affects how we see discounts too.
Definitely. Gonzalez's study showed people often prefer a larger absolute discount, like $50 off, compared to a larger percentage discount, like 25% off. Even if the percentage saves them more money on a high-priced item, the bigger absolute number just feels more substantial.
And the double discount illusion.
Right. Offering, say, 20% off, then an additional 10% off often seems more appealing than a single 28% discount, even though the single discount is better. We tend to add the percentages 20 plus 10, 30 incorrectly, ignoring the fact the second discount applies to an already reduced base. Denominator neglect strikes again.
Okay, we've covered a lot of specific biases, and the sources consistently emphasize one overarching point: the need to experiment.
Absolutely crucial, because, as we've seen, our intuitions about what influences behavior are often wildly wrong.
Like that Christian Aid envelope test.
Perfect example. They tested different messages asking for donations. The ones that seemed most logical or emotionally appealing to the marketing team didn't necessarily perform best. Some even backfired. You just don't know until you test.
It links back to what Timothy Wilson said. We're often strangers to ourselves. We don't always know our own real motivations.
Exactly. Think about that wine and music experiment. French music playing led to more French wine sales, German music to more German wine sales. But when asked, shoppers were completely unaware the music influenced their choice.
So claim data, what people say influences them, is unreliable.
Highly unreliable. You need observed data, what people actually do. That's where testing comes in.
And techniques like monadic testing.
Very useful. Show different groups slightly different versions of something like an ad, a web page, a price presentation, and see how their behavior changes. That car pricing example.
Daily versus weekly versus annual cost.
Right. Monadic testing revealed that framing it as a low daily cost was far more persuasive than the total annual cost, even though it's the same amount. You isolate the variable and measure the impact.
And then moving from controlled tests to real-world field experiments.
Ideally, yes. Testing in the actual context where the behavior happens. The sources outline a good 6-step process. Identify the problem, research, form a hypothesis, run a quick test, then a real-world test, and finally act on the findings.
The key seems to be embracing a culture of frequent, low-cost testing. Don't assume. Test.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, let's talk about framing. We touched on it earlier, but it deserves its own focus.
Absolutely. How you present information can totally change its impact, even if the underlying facts are the same.
That EU study on credit card surcharges versus cash discounts is a classic. People hate surcharges, losses, much more than they like equivalent discounts, gains. Same economic reality, vastly different perception.
Like the 75% lean versus 25% fat beef study.
Exactly. Same beef, but 75% lean sounds much healthier and more appealing.
Yeah.
It leverages Kahneman's idea of WYCIAD. What you see is all there is. We focus on the information presented, the frame, and often ignore what's left out.
And it's not just the overall frame. Tiny word choices matter enormously. Loftus and Palmer's car crash study.
Groundbreaking stuff asking how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other resulted in significantly higher speed estimates than asking the same question with verbs like hit or contacted.
Words literally create different realities in our minds. Amazing.
And think about Danny Boyle telling the Olympic opening ceremony performers to save the surprise instead of don't spoil it. Much more positive and engaging framing.
A really powerful framing technique mentioned is focusing on losses rather than gains. Loss aversion.
Yes, we feel the pain of a loss about twice as strongly as the pleasure of an equivalent gain. Aronson's study on home insulation. Framing the message around how much money homeowners were losing each day through poor insulation was far more motivating than framing it around potential savings.
And using nouns instead of verbs, like being a voter versus voting.
Bryan's study showed that phrasing it as an identity, being a voter, increased registration and turnout compared to phrasing it as an action, voting. It taps into our desire for identity consistency.
Wow. And even framing shortages. Sold out versus out of stock.
Yeah, Peterson's 2019 study found sold out was received better. It subtly implies popularity and social proof others wanted it too, whereas out of stock just feels like poor management. Framing is everywhere. It really is. And it connects directly to our sense of fairness.
Which is incredibly powerful, isn't it? Our aversion to unfairness.
Deeply ingrained. The ultimatum game demonstrates it perfectly. People will reject an offer of free money if they perceive the split to be unfair, even though rejecting means they get nothing. Punishing unfairness often trumps maximizing personal gain.
And that study where people preferred a lower absolute payment if the relative share felt fairer.
Blount and Bazerman. Yeah, fairness matters, sometimes more than the absolute outcome for ourselves.
So how do you apply this to pricing?
Justification is key. Thaler, Kahneman, and Netsch's research showed price increases are much more acceptable if they're perceived as fair, usually meaning they're linked to increased cost for the seller. Raising prices just to increase profits, especially during high demand, feels unfair and can cause backlash.
Transparency helps, and subtle cues can nudge fairness too, like eyes on posters.
Bateson's anti-littering study, posters with images of eyes led to less littering than posters with flowers. The feeling of being watched, even subconsciously, seems to trigger more cooperative, fair behavior.
Okay, switching gears slightly. What happens when people feel their freedom is being restricted? Reactance.
Psychological reactance. It's that negative feeling, that urge to push back when we sense our freedom of choice is being threatened or eliminated.
Like the graffiti study in the men's toilets.
Pennebaker and Sanders, 1976. A mild sign like, please don't write on the walls, had little effect. But a stern authoritarian sign, do not write on these walls under any circumstances, actually increased the amount of graffiti.
Telling people what they can't do makes them want to do it more.
Sometimes, yes. Especially if it feels like an illegitimate restriction on their autonomy. It's a pushback against perceived control.
And this is stronger when there's a power imbalance.
Yes.
Or with loyal customers.
Yes, the source material notes that assertive ads can backfire with highly committed customers. It feels like the brand is telling them what to do, rather than respecting the relationship. And reactance also seems culturally influenced, being higher in individualistic cultures.
So how do you avoid triggering reactance when you need to guide behavior?
Well, one surprisingly effective technique is to explicitly remind people of their freedom. Adding a simple phrase like, but you are free to choose, or but you are free to refuse to a request. Guerguin and Pasquale found this dramatically increased compliance with requests for donations or bus fare. It acknowledges their autonomy.
That's really interesting. What else?
Involving people in the decision, even cosmetically. Lamberton's study on tax compliance showed that letting people advise on how their tax money should be spent increased their willingness to pay. Gives a sense of agency.
And just being clear.
Yes, providing clarity, even about negative changes or restrictions, helps. Understanding the why can make limitations feel less arbitrary and more acceptable.
It's a balancing act, guiding choice, without making people feel controlled. Now, a really intriguing one, the red sneakers effect. Signaling status by not conforming.
Exactly. It's the idea that deliberately breaking established norms can sometimes signal high status, confidence, and power, but, and it's a big but, there are key conditions.
We know conformity is powerful, right?
Yeah.
Asher's experiments showed that.
Immensely powerful. The pressure to fit in is strong. But high-status individuals often have more permission to deviate. Think of a famous artist dressing eccentrically.
But it's nuanced. What are the caveats?
Okay, first, the person or brand needs to have already established some status or credibility in the relevant domain. That study with the unshaven professor.
Right.
He was seen as higher status only if the audience knew he was a top researcher at a prestigious university. If he was just some random lecturer, the nonconformity didn't work. You need the underlying status first.
Okay, so you can't just be different for difference's sake. What else?
The nonconformity needs to be perceived as intentional, deliberate, not just a mistake or sloppiness. Gino's study with the red bow tie at a black tie event showed this. It signals confidence because you're knowingly breaking the rule.
Intentional deviation. Got it. And the third condition?
The audience needs to be familiar with the norm being broken. They need to understand the code to recognize that you're intentionally violating it. That study in luxury boutiques in Milan.
Yes.
Shoppers wearing gym clothes were perceived as higher status, likely a celebrity or billionaire not needing to conform, by the boutique staff who understood luxury dress codes. Tourists seeing the same thing might just think they were dressed inappropriately. Context and audience knowledge matter.
So the red sneakers effect is powerful but tricky. You need status, intentionality, and a savvy audience. Don't try this at home unless you know what you're doing.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Nearing the end, let's talk about the halo effect.
Right, where one positive trait spills over onto everything else.
Exactly. A positive perception in one specific area, like friendliness, attractiveness, or even just a strong brand association, can create a positive halo that influences judgments about completely unrelated attributes like competence, intelligence, or product quality.
That lecturer study again.
Oh.
Warm versus cold.
Nisbet and Wilson. Same lecture, same mannerisms. But the lecturer initially described as warm was rated as more competent, more likable, better accent, everything. The initial positive trait created a powerful halo.
It's like Kahneman said, we answer an easier question. Instead of how competent is this person, we answer, do I like this person?
Precisely. It's a cognitive shortcut, and it means you can sometimes achieve goals obliquely. Want people to think your product is higher quality, maybe focus on making your brand seem more likable or trustworthy.
And it's stronger for things that are hard to judge.
Yeah.
Ambiguous attributes.
Yes, research suggests the halo effect has more sway when the trait being judged is subjective or difficult to assess objectively. And of course, physical attractiveness creates a very strong halo effect.
The what is beautiful is good stereotype.
Sadly, yes. Studies show attractive people are often judged as more intelligent, kind, and successful, and this can even have real-world consequences in things like hiring and elections.
A bias to be aware of, definitely. Okay, penultimate topic. The wisdom of wit. Humor.
Yes. We all enjoy a laugh, but does it actually work in persuasion?
The sources seem to say yes.
Overwhelmingly so. Gagan's study showing waiters who tell a simple joke get significantly larger tips is a nice, tangible example.
Makes sense. Creates rapport, and it helps with memory.
Definitely. Research by Baines and Ziv shows humorous material in videos or lectures is recalled much better than neutral material. Humor grabs attention and makes things stick.
And it can even make you seem more competent.
Surprisingly, yes. Research by Bitterly, Brooks, and Schweitzer found that successfully landing a joke can boost perceptions of confidence, competence, and status. As long as the joke is appropriate and lands well, of course.
And advertising research backs this up.
Consistently. Eisen's meta-analysis confirmed that humor generally enhances advertising effectiveness across various metrics.
So maybe brands should consider bringing back the funny more often.
Shotton argues for it, quoting Martin Bose about the decline of humor in ads. The evidence suggests it's often a missed opportunity.
And it's particularly useful for tricky subjects.
Yes, humor can help overcome the ostrich effect, our tendency to avoid unpleasant information. By making a difficult topic less threatening and more engaging, humor can get messages through that might otherwise be ignored.
Like the Melbourne Metro Dumb Ways to Die campaign.
Exactly. A brilliant, darkly humorous campaign about safety around trains that went viral and was incredibly effective. Humor disarmed the audience.
But it works best for brands people already like.
Yes. Chattopadhyay and Basu found humor is generally more effective when the audience already has a positive attitude towards the brand or source. If they already dislike you, a joke might fall flat or even backfire.
Good to know. Use humor, but use it wisely.
Yeah.
Okay, final topic. The peak end rule. How we remember experiences.
This one is fascinating and has huge implications. The peak end rule says that our memory of an experience isn't an average of every moment. Instead, it's disproportionately shaped by two things. The most intense point, the peak, whether positive or negative, and the very end of the experience.
The colonoscopy study is the famous, if slightly uncomfortable, example.
Radlmeyer and Kahneman. Patients' retrospective evaluations of the procedure's discomfort were best predicted by the pain level at the worst moment and the pain level right at the end. The duration of the procedure had surprisingly little impact on their memory of the overall pain.
So a shorter, intensely painful experience might be remembered as worse than a longer one that's less intense overall, especially if the longer one has a milder ending.
Exactly. And another study even showed that deliberately adding a few minutes of less intense discomfort at the very end of the procedure actually made patients rate the entire experience as less unpleasant overall compared to ending abruptly at the peak pain point.
Wow. The ending really anchors the memory, and this applies to positive experiences too.
Absolutely. That DVD study, people chose which free DVD they wanted based on their memory of a previous movie night. Those whose evening ended with a great movie rated the whole night better and were more likely to choose a similar DVD, even if the earlier movies were mediocre. Ending on a high matters.
And your own ad recall research showed this too.
Yes. Working with Unruly, we found ads that saved their strongest emotional peak for the very end were significantly more memorable and better branded than ads where the peak happened earlier.
So the practical tactics are?
3 main things. 1, fill in the troughs. Try to mitigate or eliminate the negative peaks, the worst parts of the experience. 2, amplify the pinnacles, make the best moments even better and more memorable. 3, always end on a high note. Leave a positive final impression.
And we need to remember the negativity bias here too, right? Bad is stronger than good.
Crucial point. Negative experiences weigh more heavily on our minds and memories. That's why addressing those negative peaks, the troughs, is so important. Think Disney managing queue boredom, or Houston Airport speeding up baggage claim because waiting for bags was the biggest complaint, even more than flight delays.
Minimizing the lows and amplifying the highs.
Like the Magic Castle Hotel in LA with its popsicle hotline, a fun, memorable peak experience.
And ending on a high.
Think about a restaurant giving you a small treat with the bill, like Hawksmoor's chocolate salted caramels, or those post-credit scenes in Marvel movies, little things that leave you with a positive final feeling.
Wow. Okay, that brings us to the end of this really fascinating deep dive. My head is spinning, actually, with all these insights into the illusion of choice and behavioral science.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, from habits to framing to fairness, all these evidence-based principles that show how our choices are shaped, often in ways we don't even realize.
And the key, as the sources emphasize, is that this isn't just guesswork. It's backed by research, by experiments. Nullius in verba, as the Royal Society says.
Take nobody's word for it. Look at the evidence.
We really hope this deep dive is giving you some aha moments, maybe some practical tools you can use. It's definitely worth reflecting on which of these biases might be playing out in your own life or work.
Absolutely. And if you want to go deeper, the books mentioned are fantastic starting points. Rory Sutherland's Alchemy, Blind Sight by Matt Johnson and Prince Cuman, Seth Stevens-Davovitz's Everybody Lies, all offer really compelling perspectives.
Yeah, highly recommend those. So we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. Given everything we've discussed today, all these subtle psychological nudges and biases, how much of what we choose is really our own conscious decision, and how much is shaped by the context, the framing, the friction, or lack thereof?
Something to definitely think about.
It is. Thanks for joining us on The Niche Dive.